Om Shanti, and welcome to the second session of the topic that we started yesterday, free will and predestination. And Sister Denise talked about spherical thinking. There were many powerful points, learnings, but one or two things stood out for me. And when Sister Denise said that, see the difference between who you are and what you're doing. And that's how you can point a finger to how you have been conditioned. And the second is when Sister Denise said to feel the feelings in all its intensity and yet not be overwhelmed by it. And the importance of this, feeling the feelings, is because if I disconnect with the feelings, then I go back to coping mechanisms and reaction to trauma, which then makes me in bondage and I remain a victim. And I feel that's very important to work on in one's journey. And finally, it's very interesting, this paradox. There is always free will and there is always predestination. Sister Denise will now talk about the yantra, how to use drama as a tool. Of course, again, drama is something that we have been hearing about, but exactly how do we use this as a weapon, as a tool for our advantage? So, Om Shanti.
So we will continue with this material and we're looking at yantras. You're all familiar with the word mantra, but you might not know that the word mantra means a piece of advice. And you might think it's a sacred sound. It's not. It's a piece of advice. So if you don't know what your mantra means, then you can't take the advice. So yantra is an instrument. Tools, instruments, weapons. These are all synonyms in India. And I haven't seen it in any other culture where you think of your tools as weapons or your weapons as tools. Probably the military would think of their weapons as tools, but mostly people don't have a synonym, tools and weapons. Now, this cycle, the Swadershan chakra, is to be found on the right-hand index finger of the deity Vishnu. He has four symbols, and one of them is the conch, one is the lotus flower, and one is the mace. So each of these are instruments, tools, and weapons. And the cycle is specifically a tool that enables pure thought. So we're going to have a look at that today, that how does this make us have pure thought? And if we don't use it, we cannot have pure thought. So let's move forward with the material here. So yantras. These are the concepts that are provided to us through spiritual knowledge. They're yantras, which means instruments. They are tools, so they have a purpose, and we need to learn how to use them for which purpose and in what circumstances. So the purpose is to maintain pure thought, and the circumstances are events and situations which normally provoke reactive thoughts, impure thoughts, negative emotions, and all the thoughts that go with that. And so this is a tool that you have to initiate as soon as one of those situations arises, so that you can maintain pure thought. And if you don't maintain pure thought, then this trigger event or situation will force you into negative karma, which is why it happened in the first place. So you're in a loop. And the trigger situation is because of negative karma that you did in the past, and it's designed to make you do the same type of negative karma in the present, so that you remain in this loop of being triggered into your same usual type of negative emotion and behavior that keeps you trapped. And this is why the Swadarshana chakra is really an instrument to enable you to become free. But it has to be initiated simultaneously with the challenging situation. So that's called fast response. This cycle is also called the knowledge of the cycle of time. And your response has to be instant. And so if you really know about time, and you also really know about instant response. And if you think about your personal situation, how often and in what circumstances do you have a delayed response? And because of the delay, you miss the opportunity to do the right thing at the right time. And so the Swadarshana chakra also helps you to be fast, so that you immediately respond, do the right thing at the right time, all of which is instantaneous. So we practice this. So the purpose of the instrument is to enable pure thought. The obstacle is waste thought. So waste thought is called Vyart Sankalap. So you have these words, waste and Vyart. Now, Vyart has other meanings. And if you look at the etymology of the word, it really means something which is without significance, that doesn't have meaning. And what you're supposed to be is someone who understands, and therefore the thoughts that you produce have to be meaningful. Otherwise, it doesn't correspond with a person who has understanding. So this Vyart Sankalap, or a meaningless thought, is what happens in your mind when your mind is instantly triggered by the challenging situation that forces you to react with your same old negative emotion, negative thought, negative feeling, and negative action, which keeps you in the loop. So while it's called meaningless, we have to understand that meaningful means something that is applied to enable you to be free and to keep you free. There are many people who suffer from obsessive compulsive self-defeating thought trains. And this is I think it's part of mental illness. So I'm not saying that everybody is mentally sick, although there is a case for saying that, because everyone is very much under the influence of their past negative karma, which is a weight on the soul. Now, when something is weighted, it means that your circumstance is not neutral in regard to that thing. The weighted nature of the thought is that it is more likely to take place than not. And this is why it is said that sin is a weight or a burden on the soul. So when you do a negative karma, it causes that thought that precipitated the negative karma to be weighted such that the next time a similar situation arises, it triggers that weight, and that weight is stronger than your personal strength to do otherwise, which means that the purpose of meditation, the purpose of yoga, is to acquire enough weight to counterbalance the weight of negative karma. So you need to be a heavy-duty yogi with that kind of weight. And weight also indicates personal strength. So when you have enough personal strength to keep this instrument spinning, and also to counterbalance the weight of the negative karma, which forces you to repeat itself, then you are a person who is leading a life of freedom, which is the meaning of Jivan Mukti. And so a person with the inability to take care of their mind, or who doesn't bother to do the things which are required to take care of the mind, this person is a slave. And you don't want to be a slave. You don't have to be a slave, but you must do what you need to do to keep your freedom. Now, Vyart Sankalp arises from using conventional moral logic and looking at the world in terms of right and wrong. So conventional moral logic is how you were trained at home by your parents and family, at school by your educators, and also the state, because the state decides what you learn at school, and also anything that comes from your religious environment. And all of this has to do with conditioning you to behave in a certain way in the face of particular circumstances. And, the state trains people to behave in such a way that the state can use people to control the other people who are less easily able to come under control of the state. And when you are a person who is interested in freedom, you also don't want to be used in that way, because that will also incur negative karma, because you will be used, unbeknownst to you, to incriminate someone else. And there'll also be a backlash, because there will be grievance of the person who you incriminated. And so you get yourself into a lot of trouble by allowing yourself to be used in that way. So very, very important to keep yourself free. Now, looking at the world in terms of right and wrong, it's like black and white. So you're trained to see people as good people or bad people according to the ideas of the state, basically. It could be the state or the religion or the family, but eventually they're all one thing. And this is also called linear thinking, because it prevents you from looking at the whole and from seeing people as they are. You see people according to their position. So anyone who's in a position of authority is automatically considered to be right. And whatever they do must be right, even if it seems to be wrong. You will override your inner view that it's not right, and disregard the signals from your conscience. And this is not a sensible thing to do, but it's how people get trained. Now, almost everyone in the world thinks in linear fashion. This is how the education system goes. So it is a delicate and subtle process to move out of linear thinking into spherical thinking. And we had some discussion on this yesterday. And I find that even if you're presenting the ideas of spherical thinking to people who may not have adequately worked with the gyan, they won't get it. And they will think that there's no difference between linear and spherical thinking. So some people can get it, but many people can't. Now, the Supreme Being, or the Omniscient One, is likely to be more intelligent than the present-day scientific community. Now, why I wrote this is that people who are quite well educated in science very often look at God as lesser than science. And I think this is why Shiv Baba often speaks of science as arrogant. And he will underline that expression quite a bit, that science is arrogant, but he doesn't really say why and how. But I think this is one of the areas where we can pinpoint it, because science looks at anything that can be measured, and you cannot measure God. You cannot perceive God. You cannot discern God through any kind of scientific instrument. And then to conclude that if God or anything else cannot be discerned through scientific means and described through scientific methods, therefore it doesn't exist. This is a very arrogant statement to make. Humility would be, well, science just deals with material things, and anything that is beyond materialism is beyond our capacity. And that would not be arrogant. But science doesn't do that. It says if it's not in our purview, it doesn't exist, or it's made up, or it's fantasy, or something which belittles and diminishes anything that they do not define and describe using the methods of science. So when you're arrogant, there is a saying, pride comes before a fall. And one of the problems of science, which pure science produces technology, and technology is used predominantly for military means and ways to control the public. And then the reason why you who own technology use it in the way that you do is because of lack of wisdom. And so that would also be called lack of intelligence. So it looks very good in some ways, but then I think because you don't look at the whole picture, your relationship with problems is antagonistic. It's quite interesting to see how that was playing out. I was seeing in the news today that there is a 5,000-mile wide big blob of seaweed, which is sitting there in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it's headed towards Florida. And it's much larger than normally happens, and it's much earlier in the season than normally happens. And the effect of it is quite negative if you want people to be tourists or if you want to do fishing. And I thought, we've got all these issues of climate change. And it's interesting to see how the oceans are saying, if you do things to the ocean which are quite damaging using science and technology, there will be unexpected consequences, because the ocean has the capacity to take care of itself. And that can sometimes put humanity using science and technology to exploit nature in an adversarial relationship with nature. And so then the people talk about fighting this bad thing that's happening, and that whatever human beings do is by definition good, and if there are bad consequences, then you have to fight it. But nobody thought, oh, you have to use your intelligence and understand that your actions have created these consequences, because maybe you have to look at the actions that created them and not just think about fighting the consequences. So we have to understand that looking at things only through science is limited. And my next question is, on what basis would it be possible to recognize knowledge that comes from that source, the source being the Supreme Being or the Omniscient One? Now, those of us who are studying Raj Yoga, which should be pretty much everyone on this session, we know that this knowledge comes from the Supreme Being, who is the Omniscient One. And the Supreme Being is higher than a human being in all ways, and is outside the range of human beings to define and to look at completely. But yet people do tend to judge God and define God in ways that are different from what God actually is. So we are actually putting ourselves in a little bit of danger, I would say, by relating to God with this arrogance. And I think that we are beginning to discover some of the negative consequences of doing that. So let's go further. So these are not easy subjects to grapple with, but they're helpful when considering the subject of free will and predestination. When you look at it from a scientific angle, you're looking at cause and effect, which is also part of the law of karma. But these spiritual laws are never seen in isolation. Science, being linear, also tends to be specialized and tends to also look at things in isolation from the greater whole, the bigger picture. And what we're looking at here is free will and predestination, not as either or, but as things that coexist. Just as the mind, intellect, and sanskaras coexist, and we don't have a problem with that, even though they're very different and you can't really separate them. And so we need to start looking at free will and predestination as one thing and not mutually exclusive. So everything that's happening, once it comes from the past into or from the future, you can say, into the present, because this is the way of time. And time, the past goes back into the past further, and whatever is there in the future, it comes into the present, and then it stays for an instant and goes into the past. And then some other thing from the future comes into the present. Now, the present is impacted by our past karma from the past creating an effect in the present, as in cause and effect, but also the things that are predestined, that are there already in the future, they come into the present. And so when the time comes, here it is. We have this language, we use this expression. We say an idea whose time has come. That means the idea is already there in the future, but you won't know what it is until it appears in the present. In the same way, I think that there are consequences of actions which are long-term. So the consequences are there in the future, they're discernible. Anyone who is a futurist knows how to look at trends and read what the trends are doing, what they're saying, and then you can calculate within how much time this predictable scenario will be something we have to deal with right here and right now. And climate change is one of those things, you see. And people say, no, but it doesn't change anything. So these are difficult subjects to grapple with, but it's important for us to think about these things because we cannot keep our mind safe from negative thoughts, emotions, getting overwhelmed, and coming under their influence to repeat the same old mistakes. So we're acquiring this to be able to be in command of what we do at any given present moment. So being able to handle paradox is important in this process. The paradox of free will and predestination, the paradox of it is there, but it's getting created moment by moment. So this instrument that we're using is the Swadarshana chakra. And Swadarshana chakra means the wheel in which you can see yourself. That means it's a mirror. And you're not looking in this mirror to see your face, because you can do that in any piece of glass, but you're looking in the Swadarshana chakra to see a reflection of the totality of who you are, who you will be, who you were, and who you are going to be again. And that means you're able to know yourself through. And this is why it is also called the cycle of self-realization. But unless you know that it's self-realization because it's a mirror, and when you spin all of the time that you have spent on the earth and you see all of the incarnations you have had, and you look at your current situation, which is going to reflect who you have been and who you're going to be. And maybe it's very subtle to read a person to that degree, but when you start working with the Swadarshana chakra and you start being able to read yourself, then you also have an instrument by which you can read other people as well. And you can see who a person is by what they do and not by what they say. So in the intellect, we know very good things, but in the mind is where we have all of these consequences of negative karma, which override what we know and the essential self, the pure self, because of the corruption of the effect of time. So it is said that the cycle is of 5,000 years. It repeats identically and indefinitely. So we know that the soul is immortal, but people who have linear thinking are always thinking about when did time begin and when will the world end. And then they think that there's a kind of nothingness before the beginning and after the end, and that gives them closure somehow. But of course, it isn't like that. So part of spherical thinking is that we come out of the limitations of thinking in a linear way, which means the beginning is one end of the line and the end is the other end of the line. And whatever the line doesn't cover, you're going to say it doesn't exist or something like that. But you can't just make claims like that, because when you examine these things, you find that you cannot really describe them satisfactorily, because reality, existence, life, being is eternal. And it's difficult for linear thinkers to think about eternity and immortality. And researchers have said that what people desire a great deal is immortality. So it's a strange situation, because you insist on using something that makes it impossible to perceive immortality, and yet you want to perceive immortality, but you don't want to give up the instrument that prevents you from perceiving it. So we have to take that step and shift to spherical thinking in order to be able to gain access to immortality, to understand what immortality is. So the instrument that helps us to do that is the Swadarshana chakra, in which you see that whatever is the last effect, that is also the first cause. So if you're going for cause and effect, it'll take you into an endlessly repeating cycle anyway. So the instrument has to be rotated in order for it to be usable. If you're looking at the picture of the cycle just flat, just straight, it lends itself to linear thinking, and you decide on what the beginning is, which is usually the confluence age. Then you go around and you end up at the Iron Age. Or you could choose the beginning as the Golden Age, and then you end up at the Confluence Age. But that's linear. When it's spinning, there's no beginning, there's no end. And also there's no discriminating of the colors. They're all one thing. And when you spin something that's multicolored, it becomes white, because when all the colors come together, you get white. So an interesting question is, at what speed should the knowledge of the cycle be rotated? Because you can say spin, there's a certain speed of spin, and rotation, you might think rotation is slower than spinning. It's a longer word with more syllables or something like that. But the direction, the instruction is spin the cycle of self-realization, or rotate the cycle, or rotate the cycle, the wheel in which you can see yourself, because you can't see yourself unless it's spinning. And when it's spinning, what you see is white. White in the sense of everything merges together. And what is at the center of any discus is a point in the middle. So when you're rotating the cycle, it also takes you to the essential self and the point of light, which means that at the center of the spinning, it is still. And so you can be spinning at the highest possible speed and still at the same time, depending on whether you're standing on the edge or sitting in the middle. So let's go further. So we've been given two approaches to the rotation of the cycle. And the second approach was given by Avyat Bhabdada. So this one, the first one, is the one that Brahma Baba used, and it's the one that all the BKs used until the second one came along. And I think that one of the reasons the Baba gave the second one is because people don't like this one. And when you don't like it, you won't use it. But anyway, it is, I am the golden-aged Devta, which is a god or goddess, who becomes and who am the silver-aged Kshatriya, which is the warrior, who becomes and who am the copper-aged Vaishya, merchant, who becomes and who am the iron-aged Shudra, the untouchable, who becomes and who am the confluence-aged Brahman. And the cycle repeats identically. So people are somewhat concerned about their identity. And many BKs say, are you a Paka Brahmin? Are you a proper Brahmin? You very rarely get a BK who looks at another BK as a deity, who becomes a warrior, who becomes a merchant, who becomes an untouchable, who becomes a Brahmin, who becomes a deity, etc., etc. Because you cannot, in all conscience, identify yourself as perfect, completely perfect as a deity, because you know that you're not. And so you think it's a lie if you call yourself a deity when you know that you're not, or else you think it's fake, or you don't take it seriously. And equally well, you don't classify yourself as an untouchable, as the lowest caste, as the criminal, as the valueless, cheap human being, because you have too much ego for that. And so people more comfortable to say, okay, yeah, I'm a warrior, I'm a merchant, and just flip between those two without ever really accepting that you have that in you, the deity, the superhuman, the divine human being. And as much as you have that in you, to the same extent, you are corrupt and criminal and base and cheap and of no value. And also you are the Brahman, who is the one who is transforming from one to another. So linear thought gets in here for most people, and so they think about being a Brahmin, and they think about all the attributes of a Brahmin. A Brahmin is like this, a Brahmin is not like that. And then when you find that you are like that, either you go into deep depression or denial or pretense, or any other of these psychological ploys that make you inauthentic, and you have these inner struggles that you try to hide, and you dress up your face like a perfect Brahmin with a perfect drishti, with a perfect smile on your face, and the whole thing is utterly fake. And you keep that performance up, thinking that nobody will notice how fake it is. But it's all very visible. And so we have to deal with that. So let's look at the second one, which I think people prefer. I just want to go to this last sentence of the first one for a second. The first one says that there is decline from beginning to the end. So when you're rotating the cycle, you are saying to yourself, there is no progress, which is the opposite of what you have been trained in the world of linear thinking. In the world of linear thinking, which is part of the scientific approach, but it's also part of the Vedantic Hinduism, which all believes in evolution. And the knowledge of the cycle really clearly states that there is no evolution. From the beginning of when you arrive on the earth, you are heading towards hell, you are heading towards decline, and that doesn't matter what you do, it won't change that. But when you come into the confluence age, this is where all the evolution occurs. And this is where you go from the very bottom of the pile to the top of the pile. Now, looking at the second approach, I am the golden age Devta who becomes and who am the worship-worthy idol during the time of religion, who becomes and who am the confluence age Brahman, who becomes and who am the subtle angel in the body of light, who becomes and who am the discarnate soul in the soul world. Now you can do this one because it suits you. It suits your preoccupation with perfection. And you can make these statements about yourself because there's no imperfection in this. The other one, you have to embrace your absolute perfection and your absolute imperfection. But the second one, you're free to say, okay, I'm perfect. God thinks I'm perfect. So everybody else should think I'm perfect as well. So I just have to look perfect and that'll be good enough. So in the golden age and silver age, I'm this deity. And in the copper age and iron age, I'm the spirit of these idols that everybody worships. And so I am, bestowing good things to the devotees. And then I become the confluence age Brahman, who is really the highest and the special. My spiritual practice takes me to the angelic form. So we dress up in white clothes and dance around in cloudy areas and pretend to be an angel. And then, you have little programs like this. And then you are the discarnate soul, the point of light in the soul world. And each of these is a state of perfection. And so people like this one and they do this practice much more than the other one because you don't have to deal with opposites in this one. And so why did Baba give this one? It's a very good one. But I think it's really the best to work with both of these ways of spinning the cycle simultaneously. So this rotation of the 5 forms defines yourself as perfect all the time. I think psychologically it's quite useful to define yourself as perfect all the time to prevent yourself from dipping into depression because it's sometimes pretty difficult to come out of. And a lot of people are facing this dark, gloomy energy that can easily take people over. And not very many people are skilled in challenging that dark cloud. And we need to be able to do that because it's absolutely possible and definitely desirable. And just because a depressing energy comes along doesn't mean that you don't have the tools to send it on its way. So let's go just a little further. These 2 approaches must be used simultaneously. This is my view. So you can think of being in constant decline and imperfection simultaneously. So that's a real paradox, if ever there was one. So these rotations are mutually exclusive and they are simultaneous. And this is paradox. So we need to work with this to be able to sit in a paradoxical situation, because a person who can handle paradox is considered psychologically stable in the community of psychological people. So if you are a linear thinker, you will find this mental activity disturbing, because a linear thinker is always either or. I'm either perfect or I'm not. And if I'm already perfect, I don't have to do anything. And if I'm not perfect, I have to become perfect. And so you can't be perfect and not perfect at the same time. This disturbs people because of this idea of it being mutually exclusive. But when you're rotating and you're doing this practice, which causes you to be able to think spherically, then you can actually break through and break out of the limitation of linear thinking. So give yourself this exercise of rotating the two cycles simultaneously. But you have to be subtle and you have to do it enough. And this will shift you to a different kind of dimension. It'll take you off of just materialism and linear thinking. And you'll be able to shift to another level. And this is a level where you have such mental clarity that the perceptions that you have of circumstances or people's behavior or whatever doesn't trigger negative emotions, negative thoughts. You're free from that because you're seeing it for what it is and you're allowing it to be what it is, because it doesn't bother you. It doesn't trigger that moral indignation and that need to snitch or to be judgmental or to comment or condemn or any of these things, which is absolutely all about linear thinking. But you're able to understand everyone has that role that they have. The drama is made up of the light and the dark, and it is what it is. And it's not your job to be the supreme justice and condemn and comment and do all those things. That is not your job. And as soon as you start doing that, you find yourself in bondage and you find yourself flat on the floor. You are no longer able to function in the same dimension where God is, or have that perception on the drama that God has, And he's giving us this so that we can come. He says, come and sit next to me and watch this drama from my angle, and you will see something that you cannot see when you're sitting on the ground looking at it through the lens of linear thought. So this is the purpose of taking possession of the cycle or wheel in which you can see yourself. So I think I'm going to stop there, or already my voice is disappearing a little bit, and I'm going to hand it over to Sister Rose and Sister Vanji for your consideration. Yes, Om Shanti.
May we have a moment of silence to consider all this.
So it's really the work of shifting out of linear thinking into spherical thinking. And it takes forever to do that, but that's okay.
Thank you, Sister Denise. And I feel that years and years of being in the study somehow, like this has just started. You know, it's like I listening to you. I was wondering. So it's like all the while that linear thinking, the habit of that has been so entrenched that even in this path, it's still operating. I was struck with that, with the line, let alone, the deity and the golden, or the deity and the warrior, but even the term who becomes and who am. So it's like the real paradox wherein I am, at the same time I am that which is becoming. These two things existing at the same time. I am that who is perfect as well as imperfect.
You see how difficult it is for us to escape from this either or, because our entire lives we have been groomed to think of everything as either or. And I think it starts in early childhood, where people are told, what do you want to be when you grow up? That's a very, very toxic statement. And I used to tell people, I want to be the weather. And then they were absolutely sure that I was mentally limited. But, actually, I was about 5 or 6 when I would make this statement. I want to be the weather, because it's a whole system and it keeps shifting and changing. But, you are telling people you are an activity that generates money, and that determines your value as a human being, and this is where it all begins. And then the other thing is, do not do whatever it is that you happen to be doing. Why not? Why make a child sit still indefinitely and do nothing? That is the worst thing you could possibly do to a child. And, sit down on a chair listening to someone tell them things which have no relationship with anything at all, that you have to do for your entire rest of the life. It doesn't make any sense to me, never did, never will. But somehow this is what humanity decided as civilized life. But it's really so different from how people function when the world is in what we know of as the golden age and the silver age, where people are as they are automatically and naturally. And the human suffering is multiplied and intensified. So you have the karma, which makes you stressed as a child, and then plus all of the stuff that they try to control you with, which is education and religion and parenting. and especially in Northern Europe, it's like really toxic. And what it produced was war and colonialism, slave trading, and destruction of the environment, which is like really civilized thing to do, but people don't really get it. They don't really see it that way. And I think that the Iron Age really has produced the ultimate consequences of this linear thinking. And it's like coming back to tap everyone on the shoulder and say, hey guys, that wasn't very good, was it? Let me tell you something. And let me tell you that you are and you're not at the same time a perfect being of light. And you are immortal, but you have to face death. You are pure, but you have to deal with the fact that you're corrupt. And it really disturbs people's way of thinking, but yet it brings you back to what is really real and natural about human life. So it's a great gift, but yet so few people are working with it and working to free themselves from that linear thinking that put them in the problem in the first place. And I think this is why so many people have complaints about the PK world. People do. We heard it in the questions yesterday. And it's because we're looking at God through the lens of linear thinking and finding fault with it. And the nature of linear thinking is very much about finding what's wrong so that you can then fix it and play God, which you actually don't do very well. God knows how to be God. You don't know how to be God.
Even the way we are presenting Gyan, for example, to new students, we would say, I am a Brahmin and becoming a deity and becoming, so there is this like a separation even of the stages of what's happening within the soul.
Yes. And it also makes people live in a bubble, you see, and then you lose contact with the reality of the world as it is. And then you think that the more you've lost contact, the more elevated a soul you are, but actually there's something wrong with that.
Mm-hmm. So I'm just thinking right now that in thinking along this spinning of I am and becoming, I mean, it's all in one. There is a sense of it's like the honoring myself, as well as a humility in that I cannot think that I am better or worse than anyone, because even in the statement of a deity or even just as a Brahmin, still I have to figure out what kind of a Brahmin, what kind of a deity am I? Not just a very general, simplistic way of thinking I'm going to be a deity, but, like really to know who I am.
Yeah. And this is meditation, you see. This is real meditation, because meditation means to think deeply about what is worth thinking about. And Raj Yoga is based on Gyan, and Gyan is the cycle. And there are the other major pictures that Baba gave to people in visions. All of this was given in visions. And then, okay, he says, okay, now see this. I have to understand it and figure out how to use it, because these are yantras, these are instruments. And I think a problem with the linear thinking is you think of it as a fact, and then you start arguing, is it 5,000 years or not 5,000 years? If we have, other civilizations and geology and so on, then it proves that it's not. And therefore that proves that this is not God, or that God is stupid. And you see, this is the logic that people use, which produces an attitude of extreme arrogance. And then it's not very attractive, and God thinks, okay, well, we'll see, I'll keep talking, see what happens. And people just don't get it, because they're not seeing themselves. You want to make out that there's something, show something, but somebody who has a third eye, they're going to see right through that, and they'll laugh. And of course, God finds it. He often says, are you Tom and Jerry here, or Mickey Mouse, or okay, so we watch cartoons for a while, but it's not serious. See what I mean? And so time gets wasted by getting stuck in those things. So to really work with this in this way is a whole different ballgame from how most PKs work with Raj Yoga. And I prefer to work with it this way. I really do.
The presentation clarifies the complexity of the human soul. And when, I don't know if this is accurate, but when sanskars from different births would come in front of you, sometimes you're baffled by where is this coming from. But is it right to say that when I question where is it coming from, and then I position myself and say, this is a part of what I've gone through in the cycle, and I just have to confront it, accept it, and see how I can take advantage of this situation to move forward? Is that one way by which I can use the tool of Swadarshana Chakradhari, especially when it comes right in front of me, completely unexpectedly, because Baba would many times in the Murli also tell us, one of the ways by which you see that you are on a higher level is when storms of Maya would come in the most unexpected form that you never thought you were. Or
I think what I'm trying to do here is to say that it doesn't come from another life, but that all things in all the lives are with us here and now. And it comes from a section. If you say the cross section of a soul, if you would cut a soul in half and open it up like an orange, the cross section of a soul is gold and silver, copper, iron. And we see them in terms of linear time. But when you spin the cycle, there's nothing like linear time. All time is all at once. And so you will not really carry on thinking, oh, it came from this time, it came from that time, and so it's not relevant. No, it's here, it's in there. And when you think of the spherical thinking, you're, I think, also able to contain in your thoughts about yourself, you're able to contain this idea that my golden age self is right here, my silver age self is right here, my copper age self is right here, my iron age self is right here, my confluence age Brahman caterpillar in a chrysalis self stage is right here, my soul dot in the soul world is right here. Everything is right here, and it's all jumbled, and it comes out any old how. And it's a bit unclear what to do, and so we call it a storm of Maya, and sort of leave it at that. But now I think what we want to try and do is say, okay, all of it is right here, and it's a time where the soul is actually getting purged. We hear a lot about Raj Yoga as the fire of yoga, the purification of the soul. And we also know that because the soul has gone through time, literally by going through births, the soul has become depleted. And the ability of the soul to manage the contents of the soul has been lost. And one of the things that really makes it difficult is linear thinking. So spherical thinking is helpful to enable us to handle this juggling game where all the balls are all in the air at the same time and wanting to go everywhere. And it's like a madness inside. And you are acquiring the skill of holding it all and accepting it all and embracing it all and saying, yes, I am all of these things, and this is me, and I'm a highly complex, eternal 84 birth, everything from the very best to the very worst. I have the ability to do any and every kind of performance in any gender you can think of, in any race, in any color, in any culture. I'm all of it. And if you don't like it, that's too bad, because this is me, you know. But because of being weak, you can't hold it all together. And because of not knowing who you are, you can't figure out who you are, and you keep changing identities and worrying about what is my position and what is my status and what is my this and what is my that, and presenting yourself as something which is only a tiny little sliver of what you actually are. But there's too much ego to accept all of it all the time. And so this exercise that he's given us to do is a way of helping us to accept the whole totality of ourselves and be comfortable with it. Because we do not just go to heaven and stop. That doesn't happen. You know, we don't go to hell and stop either. You know, we were very, very in motion. We're in perpetual motion. And there will be stop when we go to the soul world and start when we come down, and there is no time in between. I mean, there's so many Brahmins who want to have a nice time in the soul world. There's nothing like that. It doesn't happen. You can only have an experience when you're with your body, and you're experiencing yourself over time. And now you're in the confluence age where all time, all at once, and everything going haywire all the time, internally and externally. And so you're in survival. And if you have these instruments, you can dance instead of get yourself overwhelmed by an unlimited tsunami of madness. which is the situation for people who don't have this instrument. So he says, I'm giving you the instrument, learn how to use it, teach everybody else, because you don't have much time. And take it easy, because don't worry, you're immortal.
But Sister Denise, isn't it that even, for example, how the picture of the cycle is presented when it is, like divided into these parts, it also kind of makes this thinking of, like dividing also myself into these different parts.
Absolutely. I mean, when Shiv Baba is giving people visions, it's very difficult to make physical representations of those visions. But when he gives you a vision or a dream, he can use whatever graphics he wants to make everything happen the way he wants. And now we've got the technology, the computer graphics technology, that we can actually represent these things in multiple dimensions and so on, which is why I really like this fractal geometry. That's really helpful for this. And holograms, But in the 1930s, the way people were thinking was very static. Films just began in the 1910 or something like that, you see. And sometimes Baba has said, the film industry started so that you can understand what I'm talking about. And then as time went by, we've got all these wonderful developments of technology. And he says, this is for you. Look at us. Here, we're talking to each other on opposite ends of the planet without batting an eyelid, which was absolutely unheard of until COVID came along, Now it's just normal. With or without COVID, we use these things. And we're getting to a point where we don't really need our bodies, because we can just use photographs. That'll do, We can remove ourselves from these constraints. But when Shiv Baba first came, it was the 1930s, and there was, they were developing nuclear bombs and all of this stuff. And he said, you've got 1 year in which to figure all this out, which of course was not true, but he wanted us to hurry up. And now we are kind of really slowing down for some reason. I'm not sure why. But it's possible for us to transcend the limitations of looking at the cycle picture as a static piece of primitive art, because it's possible for us in our minds to actually have it as a moving object, because it is a moving object. And for analysis, you put it still, but to make it operate, to make it work, you have to have it as a three-dimensional holographic moving instrument, which has got the past, present, and future jumping around inside it. It's got reality and fantasy jumping around. It's got all sorts of associations and darkness and light and comedy and tragedy and everything all happening. It's like you've got 8 billion movies running at the same time, and you can pop in and out of any one of them and look at them, and it's all too much for most people, but it's not all too much for God. And then he says, okay, now how am I going to show this to these people? So he shows us little bits of it. But then technology has done things to us mentally and psychologically so that we're able to manage this stuff. You know, like money is it's become a little plastic card, you see, which is followed up by the government. You know, you can't do anything without anybody knowing. There's CCTV cameras. You can't go anywhere without somebody watching you. You don't have any privacy. Even your thoughts now, they've got ways of entering into your mind and figuring out what you're thinking. And so you've been very invaded, but at the same time, you're sharp enough and smart enough to actually pull yourself entirely out of the whole drama if you want, when you want, and go and sit in the soul world and say, ha ha, you know, you can't find me here. And so we have all these instruments, and then we have to say, okay, now how will I use this instrument? What will I use it for? And what is the purpose of this instrument? Well, it's for the purpose of maintaining pure thought, because as soon as you don't have a pure thought, you're in bondage. And if you use this instrument, you can actually become skilled enough to be able to keep your mind in good shape and have a positive take on everything without being in denial or lying to yourself, you see. And you have so much strength that you're able to manage catastrophic emotions and betrayals and all whatever happens to people that they say, okay, this is too much, I can't take it, and they lose a screw, you know. Whereas we're given the tools that enable us to actually survive all this in good shape and get through. You know, it's very difficult to get through the destruction and the collapse of civilization. It's very difficult because it's collapsing one pixel at a time, you know. And so these instruments are there to get us through, and it's a great blessing.
Spinning the discus of self-realization is something we just say matter-of-factly, like repeating something that I heard, but the way you made us go through that entire process. We'll have to try it again and again and again until you say, now I am indeed the possessor of that spin, of that Swadarshana Chakradhari, not just my title, but I'm using it as an instrument. Because oftentimes, parang, my thought was, it was a title. Now, Sister Denise is emphasizing it is a tool, an instrument, a weapon. Use it so that you can conquer those waste thoughts and have pure thoughts as a result of spinning. So indeed, a very important exercise for us to use. And as she said, when you do this exercise, you arrive at mental clarity. And I'm sure all of us like that. That's the aim.
I think also it's reasonable to accept that Baba is going to put us through more and more difficulties on the inside so that we become more and more skilled. And, you know, that there's so many people having so many difficulties to keep themselves mentally stable and comfortable and just manage all the millions of problems that are happening to everybody all the time. And I thought it was quite interesting that Baba said in the Murli today, Brahma Baba is a sample of how to perform karma correctly so that you can look at that and say, okay, this is what it looks like when you do what Sheikh Baba is talking about. And then I think he's wanting us to be additional little examples of these things, because people are going to find themselves saying, I need somebody who looks like they're sane to look at. And I think that we can look like somebody sane as we grapple with all of the stuff that's happened to us. And people can say to themselves, well, if this one can do it, then I can do it, you see. And I think that's quite a useful service to offer to people, that here is how you keep it all together. Don't worry, keep going. This is the way, you know.
A comment here says, I can feel the greatness of rotating the two wheels. Thank you for the confirmation. But another comment says, can we have a simple example, please, of the spinning of these two yantras together with a relevant test that's been triggered? A simple test and trigger used here for purposes of this illustration, which the spinning will, of course, relate to.
Okay, I have a policy of not doing hypothetical examples, because every single hypothetical example is by definition untrue. So if I show you an example of untruth in order to prove truth, I'm betraying you, so I can't do that. So what I would say is, you have to think about this stuff. We're recording it so that you can listen to it again if you forget any bits of it. It's very complex.
In the examples of rotation, you go from golden, silver, copper, iron, confluence, sage. But in summaries, Baba would ask us, where are you now? What sanskars have you reached already? Are you now Sato Pradana? Are you still Tamo, Rajo, Sato, or are you already Sato Pradhan?
Well, yeah. Now we add another layer of complexity. Sato, Rajo, Tamo. Now, if you look at Vedic India and Vedantic Hinduism, they say there's no such thing as Sato, Rajo, Tamo. And Baba says there is, you see, but most BKs, Western BKs, even Indian BKs, don't know that much about Hinduism, because it's very complicated, and they did it all in Sanskrit so that nobody could know what it is unless they know that language. You know, in the Gita, it says very clearly there is Sato, Rajo, Tamo. And so Baba is saying that time causes deterioration, and you have been through time. You're an immortal soul who goes through time. So you're immortal and you deteriorate, which means that at the end of time, you have to reverse the effect of time. And so this is another thing that happens when you spin the cycle, is you reverse the effect of time. And when you meditate in such a way that you are in contact with Shiv Baba, you are reversing the effect of the deterioration. You see, and human beings believe and have total faith in evolution, but there is actually no indication anywhere of anything evolving except technology. You see, everything else is getting old and deteriorating. And even you buy a nice fancy new computer, and by 1 month later, it's already old because somebody's invented a better one so that you can spend another $10,000 on it and get something slightly better, you know? And so we are very much under the influence of the concept of evolution, which is all part of the scientific approach to life. But if you do your taxes, then you have to look at the effect of deterioration on some of your assets so that you will pay less taxes because it's less valuable because it got old, you see. And that's about the only place in this scientific world where deterioration is financially advantageous. But,
depreciation.
Depreciation, yeah. So the soul, it's very difficult for this human being in linear thinking who believes in evolution, even though everything is depreciating and deteriorating, and you're looking for immortality and you're scared to death of death. And so people's philosophy is somewhat out of whack because of that. And the morality, which is based on this philosophy, is also out of whack. And the religion, which is based on blind faith, which is based on suspension of disbelief, causes your intellect to actually no longer function at all when it comes to a philosophical, moral, and so on matters. And all you can work with really is technology, which is nice, but there's other things as well besides technology. You see, and the technology is there to help us understand this larger picture, because it's very difficult for God, who is so much of a higher intelligent being than a human being. Like, there's a vast difference. I mean, he can hear a thought of any one of his children at any time, day or night, all the time, without getting mixed up, and respond to it, you know, while still watching the general world going on, and handling the devotees, and handling the people who are in trouble, and handling the atheists, and all sorts of things all at once, you see. Sometimes he says, you don't know how many TV screens I've got. You've got, 20, 30. I have 8 billion, and I can maintain monitoring all of them, you see. It's a very, very different type of being altogether. And he's our teacher. That's pretty amazing, you know.
There's this film that won the Oscars, Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. I said, does that capture a little bit of what eternity is?
Well, this is going to be a very helpful film. I will have a look at it, because that's really what is happening. We need to be able to grasp everything, everywhere, all at once, and then distance ourselves from it to a point where we can see it and enjoy it instead of being overwhelmed by it. And then add to that all of time, not just all at one moment, but at all moments, you see. And who are you? Well, I'm me. And I think, one really, when we're on this subject, one really marvelous experience I was given in meditation one day was to feel very, very deeply that the very, very best thing there is of all things is that I am me. And that you wouldn't want anything else except that I am me. And think of how many people are so living in a state of dissatisfaction. This is wrong, that is wrong, I wish this, I'm jealous of that, etc., etc. And once you actually grasp who you are and you realize that the very, very best thing of all is that I am me, you are completely satisfied in that instant. And you're ready to let go of everything just by that moment of understanding which is an incredible gift, you know. And he gives us this cycle. I'm giving you this cycle, spin this cycle every which way, backwards and forwards. It's like a multi-dimensional Rubik cube, you can say. And once you've got it, you say, oh, yeah, I've got it. I know who I am. You can let everything go. You can be completely satisfied. And you're okay with the good and the bad and the ugly. You're not stuck in moral indignation. You see, because everyone, you know, who's protesting about whatever's going on, they're stuck in moral indignation. And what do you get as a result of it? Depleted.
Sister Denise, there's a question here. Is it possible to be operating in a combination of linear thinking and spherical thinking?
I think practically we must, because the way the world works and the way that we operate with sense perception on a day-to-day basis, it's linear thinking, but we have to know when to use linear thinking and when to use spherical thinking so that we are really expanding our capacity and using the right thing at the right moment, all for the purpose of keeping our head together and keeping our mind in a good condition. So yes, we must use all things at all times, yeah. Everything, everywhere, all at once. You better go watch that movie.
In the field of economics, they talk about circular economy, where you have everything together in an ecosystem. And so what are the materials? There will be an output, but nothing is wasted because you put it back into the cycle. I was thinking, is spherical thinking something I can illustrate, using the idea of circular economy or the ecosystem in that sense?
I think so. You'd have to work on it, because as we know from the questions and comments, people want an example, and we can talk of metaphors and analogies to help us understand something. And the earth itself never will get destroyed, you see, and the scientific community is busy making spaceships so they can go somewhere else because they're expecting the earth to be destroyed and then they'll have to go live somewhere else. But what Baba is saying is, this planet is a pretty good one. It's got all you need. Your bodies are made of the 5 elements of matter, which are in perfect ratio in the on the planet Earth. The ratio of air, earth, fire, water, and ether of your body is identical to the ratio on the planet Earth. So it's ideal for you, and you can breathe here and swim around in the water and walk around on the land and fly around in the air. And so what you're worried about, and it's only really since the, a certain point in time, let's say the beginning of the Iron Age, where everything really started to go wrong. But the way people worked with the earth and agriculture and everything was sustainable until the population reached a certain point, and we got the Industrial Revolution and all of these things in the 18th centuries, where it really became very, very bad. And now you see the population of the earth is such that the earth can't sustain it the way we are managing it, because everybody wants to have this extreme amount of wealth at the expense of all the other people. And it's a perfect recipe for collapse of the ecosystems and the economy. Now we're hearing about banks going down, and all the things are really very, very unstable, and it cannot be repaired. And so I think if people really realize what's happening in the world, they would panic. So the news media has to make sure that they don't know too much so that they don't panic.
How do we deal with Brahmin souls who are clearly having obsessive, compulsive, self-defeating thought trains, mental health issues like OCPD?
Well, I think that this is something that's happening for many people. Some Brahmins are mentally very strong, but not all. Baba says everyone is number wise. We do have a duty of care of each other, but we cannot guarantee that we can carry everyone to, the same level. Baba always says this is number wise. He always says some of you will pass, some of you will fail, some of you will continue, some of you will give up. He is really demonstrating to us that you can take a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. You know that expression, right? Mm-hmm. And so you can't take responsibility for somebody else's life. People believe they can make somebody happy. You can't make somebody happy unless they want to make themselves happy. You make yourself happy. But we have this idea about fixing people and so on and so forth. It's all part of toxic conventional morality. And we have to understand we do whatever we can, and whatever we can't do, there's nothing we can do about it. And we have to understand where our limitations are and make judicious choices, what we can do, what we can't do.
It's good to continue to study and, really listen to this again and think about it. It is a very complex subject matter. And I, the soul, also is a very complex soul. So the study continues. Thank you so much, Sister Denise. May we have a ending meditation.
So bring yourself to that quiet, peaceful point of light in the middle of the sphere of all your births. And see the sphere turning in all directions. All parts of yourself emerging at different moments. You are the perfect deity, the pure spirit, the angelic being, the fallen devil, while being also the risen angel. All parts of your being are there. But as the cycle spins, you're becoming restored to your original strength. all the different parts of yourself are finding their right place. You are a being where all the parts are slotted in, and you are one complete whole. You're getting defragmented through spinning the cycles and returning to your original, pure, brilliant state. This process of returning to the Sato Pradhan, pure, perfect state takes place sometimes quite chaotically, but you will return to that perfect, balanced condition no matter what. Om Shanti.
Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Thank you to all the translators. Thank you, Sister Vanji. And thank you, Sister Denise.